Welcome to Exopolitics Today, the week in review, and we're going to be looking at the top exopolitics stories for the week beginning June 17. And there's been some significant developments. The biggest story was this letter from a Canadian MP that spills the beans about Five Eyes nations cooperating on the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial spacecraft.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
So I'm going to be looking at my Twitter feed, which gives all the top stories that I've been able to identify. These are the ones that I feel are the most significant as far as exopolitics is concerned. So if you haven't subscribed to my Twitter feed, I suggest that you do so, because you'll get a heads up as to what is happening around the world. And with this week in review, I get to dive deep into those particular issues and kind of flesh out exactly why that is such an important story. So I began the week with a panel discussion with Dan Willis, Alex Collier, Leonard Danan, Tony Rodriguez, Chris O'Connor, and Danny Henderson on what is happening on the UFO ET disclosure front. So that particular panel discussion gives you a teaser into what different speakers are going to be focusing on at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection coming up on October 20 in Orlando, Florida. So I recommend that you go to the website. It should be appearing down there in the ticker, the website for the Galactic Spiritual Informers, so you can find out more about that. But it is definitely going to be a major UFO disclosure event. Last year, there were close to 1,000 attendees. This year is going to be even bigger, according to the conference organizer, Danny Henderson. This will be my only conference appearance for 2023. So that's your opportunity. If you have any books that you want to autograph, then just bring them along and I'd be happy to sign those for you. So now we move on to another story. This was the full 1-hour interview I did with Clayton Morris on Redacted, where we discussed the latest whistleblower testimonies and exopolitical developments. So Redacted is a very popular show. They have 2 million subscribers, and Clayton Morris is a former professional newscaster, and he is very interested in the UFO extraterrestrial phenomenon. He is very impressed by the quality intelligence that is coming out, or the revelations and disclosures that are coming out. So I was very happy to be on Redacted and to present some of the information about what it is that I've been covering, especially concerning JP, because that's the latest book I did that's just come out. So I got to talk about that with Clayton in the full interview. So definitely you can go, the details, the references are from my Twitter feed. You can go watch that full interview that goes for an hour. And I think you'll find it very interesting to see how it is a mainstream news journalist is opening up to these exopolitical issues that are coming on the scene right now. So the next story was this plan for a floating city that Japanese researchers, or that they have a plan that by 2030, they could accommodate 40,000 people in a global emergency in this kind of floating city that presumably would be out there in the Pacific Ocean, and it would be able to withstand the kind of ocean turmoil that you can have with hurricanes, or if you had some kind of a emergency in terms of your nation, whether it's flooding, tidal waves, and so forth. This floating city, it would be designed to deal with that. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, this is a floating city that they are going to build, presumably by 2030, using conventional power sources and propulsion systems to propel this city to where it needs to go, or to power this city. Now, of course, between now and 2030, I think what we're going to witness over the next 7 years is going to be a phenomenal release of some of the advanced anti-gravity technologies and the alternative energy systems that have been suppressed for, well over 70 years now. I mean, the 1950s was when you had anti-gravity technology being suppressed in mainstream news journals. So once this technology is released, we're going to quickly transition from floating cities, because you can build a floating city now using current propulsion and energy systems, and that can go anywhere on any of the oceans and provide a kind of safe habitat. But just imagine, once you have free energy and you have anti-gravity propulsion systems, we're going to transition very quickly from floating cities to flying cities. And that is going to be really incredible to witness. And I fully expect that over the next 10 years, up until 2030 or 2033, if you want to go a little bit further, that we are going to have all of these suppressed technologies that go back to the day of Nikola Tesla. I mean, currently there are 6,000 patent applications that are withheld due to national security orders. And these patent applications deal with alternative health systems, alternative energy systems, and anti-gravity technology. That these are immediately suppressed. They're never granted. Those patents are withheld and never granted. But once we have disclosure, then those patents are going to be granted, released, and you're going to have an incredible renaissance in terms of all of these major corporations, as well as garden or home companies, building these advanced technologies, because there'll be virtually unlimited energy. And once you have unlimited energy, you can build anything. So floating cities to flying cities. I think that's going to be something we're going to witness during our lifetime. Well, here's something that was very interesting that came out on June 18. And that is, a study was conducted by a New Jersey casino organization on which US state would be the safest during an alien invasion. So the New York Post published it. Now, the question is, why did they do that? Let's just have a look at that story, because I think it's quite interesting that they would go to that effort to study what cities would be the most likely to survive an alien invasion. And so there you have cities such as, states such as New York, and then you have, actually, I think that was Virginia. Yeah, the state of Virginia was number one. Then number two, the state of Georgia. Then number three, what is that? I'm not quite sure. I don't know my US geography all that well. That could be, I don't think that's Massachusetts, maybe New Hampshire, one of those kind of New England states. But the criterion that they used was they looked at the number of military bases and the number of police. And so they decided that in the event of an alien invasion, the states that had the highest ratio of police and military bases, they would be the safest. So that's how they came up with those criteria. So very, very interesting. You have some other states here. Florida is number 13. Number 9, I think that's Arkansas. So Texas is number 18. Louisiana is number 5. Again, highest ratio of police and military, and you'll get to be one of the safe places during an alien invasion. So, the question is, why did they do this study? Why in the world would a casino organization put together some resources to find out what state would be the most likely to survive an alien invasion? So this is the question. Is this something that's just preparing people for some kind of false flag event? Or is it just, casinos are famous for betting, so is this something that that people would bet on? I'm not sure, but my guess would be that it's more likely that this is some kind of psyop. But very interesting study conducted by a New Jersey casino. Now, Congressman Tim Burchette sits in the House of Representatives. He's the representative for the one of the districts in Tennessee, in Knoxville, which is close to where I'm currently staying. And it's very encouraging to see a congressman such as Tim Burchette being so outspoken when it comes to the UFO. So in this article about the interview that he did, he says that the government is covering up the Roswell UFO crash. So, he's doing that because he's one of those congressmen that has been sitting in on these classified briefings involving whistleblowers who have been coming in and saying what they have learned about the cover-up, about secret reverse engineering projects concerning the recovered spacecraft. So he's been hearing these in closed-door sessions, and so he's coming out, and he can't give any particular details because these are classified hearings, so he can't give details, but he can speak in generalities and say, yeah, the government has covered up the UFO crash in since 1947. So that's very, very significant, I think, that this congressman is being so proactive in talking about these issues. So let's move on to the next story. I want to try and get through this interview in under an hour, if possible. So we might make these weekend reviews roughly an hour, hopefully not much longer than that. Well, this was an interview I did with Karina Pataki on Exopolitics Today. That came out on Monday, June 19. So she was really very clear about her analysis of the religious texts and what they have to say about some of these key figures. And she focused on Yahweh and Yeshua and the extraterrestrial connection with that. And she looked at the texts themselves, the religious texts, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and what they have to say about what it was that Yahweh commanded the Israelites to do. And she really was very knowledgeable about those texts, about the kind of things that Yahweh commanded the Israelites to do. There was a lot of ethnic cleansing, a lot of slaying of men, women, children, and even the animals of conquered peoples, because they were regarded as impure. And so she concludes that the Yahweh that was guiding the Israelites, the ancient Israelites, was none other than Enlil, the sky god or the space commander of the Anunnaki fleets. And that's very significant because when we look at the origins of the Hebrew religion, it comes from Abraham, who emigrated out of the city of Ur in Sumer. And he carried with him a lot of the religious texts and traditions. And of course, he had his own experiences, but he would have been very familiar with Enlil, the sky god, who considered himself the supreme god of the Anunnaki. And he was the guy that controlled the Anunnaki space fleets. So he was the one that really could dominate all the other Anunnaki gods, because Earth, during the Sumerian times, you had different cities and you had different Anunnaki gods and goddesses in charge of these different cities. So Enlil, being kind of the most badass of the Anunnaki, at some point decided to wipe out others, and so he would command his people to do that. So I think her conclusion that Yahweh is none other than Enlil is correct, because Enlil in the Sumerian texts comes across as a bit of a psychopath. And if you look at the Old Testament, the Yahweh described in there is also kind of like, described as a jealous God, a vindictive God. So, I mean, those are the qualities we would imagine of a psychopath. Now, that doesn't mean that the God described in the Old Testament and the New Testament is a psychopathic God, because as she explains, in fact, there are two gods. There's another one that Jesus prayed to, who stands above all the other gods. So this is, if you like, the Logos, the word, whatever you want to call it, that stands above these beings like the Anunnaki, like Enlil. So that was who she believed, this positive God that Yeshua prayed to. But definitely worth listening to. That is a very informative interview. So here is something that I found to be very interesting. Nick Pope, a former who worked the UFO desk in the British Ministry of Defence for, I think it was 4 years or 3 years, something like that. I believe it was in the 1980s, quite a long time ago. But nevertheless, I mean, he got to be quite famous, quite a celebrity, because he was the guy running the UFO desk for the Ministry of Defence and was given permission to talk about it, which is interesting when you think about it. Who else has served in that position, and how come they haven't been out in the public arena talking? So Nick Pope has been given the kind of thumbs up to talk about this, and I suspect that's because the Ministry of Defence and MI6, MI5, GCHQ, they're quite happy with Nick Pope putting out a particular narrative. So this is interesting. The narrative he is putting out, it's typically about evil aliens doing terrible things, and so he's someone that supports the aliens or the UFOs are a national security threat. He's been behind that for a long time, and his analysis is that right now in the United States, there's a power struggle being fought to expose alien life. You got the white hats that want to expose things, and you got the black hats that want to hold things back. And so he, for example, thinks David Grush, who we talked about in my last week in review at length, that he is one of these whistleblowers. And apparently there's quite a number of them that have been coming forward to talk about these issues. And so David Grush, he is someone that Pope believes is part of this kind of white hat initiative to get the truth out. And there are others that want to stop all that. Now, of course, others believe that David Grush is actually someone that's putting out the alien, perpetuating the alien threat scenario. So in that sense, we can say that, well, there's kind of different shades of grey here that are in operation. That I wouldn't say he's completely a white hat, because he does believe that the UAPs are a national security threat. And anyone who has studied this issue for any number of years is going to eventually conclude that UFOs or extraterrestrial spacecraft are not a national security threat at all. It is a reverse engineered craft, and the different factions running the special access programs and the secret space programs. This is where you have the main threat. So Nick Pope, I think there's truth in him identifying a kind of power struggle, but maybe there's more shades than just black and white here. So now we look at China is establishing a rival international space alliance to the US-based Artemis Accords. So this story that was covered in Space News talks about how China is attracting different moon based partners. So several years ago, China, along with Russia, this was before the Ukraine invasion, China and Russia announced a lunar research station that they would be joint founders of, that they would be cooperating in. But there haven't been many other nations that have signed on, and because Russia's undergoing international sanctions because of its invasion of Ukraine, China has been trying to get other nations to come in. And so far, the nations that are part of this Lunar Research Station initiative are Russia, Pakistan, the United Arab Emirates, and the Asia Pacific Space Cooperation Organization. None of those are major space players apart from Russia, of course. And so why is that important? Why does China want to create a rival space alliance to the Artemis Accords, which are a set of bilateral agreements that the United States has with, I think now it's 25 or 26 nations that have signed on to the Artemis Accords. And I'll talk a little bit more about the most recent signatory, which is quite a major addition. So why is China trying to do this? Well, if you've been following my research, you'll know that in the middle of in the fall of 2021, there were the Jupiter Accords that were signed, and Elena Danaan described those Jupiter Accords that were ratified at this space station floating above the atmosphere of Jupiter. That was actually confirmed by Courtney Brown and the Farsight Institute. So that part of Elena Danaan's testimony was corroborated independently by the Farsight Institute. So there were these meetings on this space station run by the Ashtar Command, and there were 14 spacefaring nations that set delegations there, predominantly military delegates, but also their National Space Program delegates, as well as major corporations such as Elon Musk with SpaceX, Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin, and Richard Branson with Virgin Galactic, and Doug Bigelow with Bigelow Aerospace. So you had corporations, you had national space programs, you had military institutions like US Space Command that were there, that were represented. And once the Galactic Federation of Worlds, the Andromeda Council, the Ashtar Command, and this Council of Five kind of like interviewed the different delegates, they decided that the United States Space Command was the natural leader of Earth, because it was very clear, as far as the extraterrestrials were concerned, that Earth had to speak with one voice, and to do that, there had to be one delegation or one representative that would be the point person for these different extraterrestrial civilizations, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, why would they go to squabbling nations if there were a burning issue? Like, for example, the Draco reptilians are going to send a space fleet back into your solar system. What are you going to do about it? And if the different nations were squabbling over who's going to do what, nothing gets done. But if you have one nation like Space Command, United States Space Command, being in the lead, and that's recognized and supported by the different extraterrestrials, then you can have a lot of collaboration and coordination to offset whatever threat lies ahead for our solar system and planet Earth. So that's why they chose that. Now, it eventually came down to these 6 nations that would form an executive council, and these were the 5 permanent UN Security Council members: the United States, Russia, China, Britain, France, and a 6th nation, which we guessed was Japan, because that has, aside from the other 5 nations, it has also had the longest running space program. So the decision that was taken after the Galactic Federation surveyed all of these nations was that the United States Space Command would be the leader for the time being. And Russia and China left that meeting. They were very unhappy with that. They were hoping for a different outcome. So this gives you a little bit of background as to why China and Russia are wanting to set up a rival space alliance to the United States, because the reasoning is if they attract a sufficient number of major nations, then eventually the Galactic Federation and the Andromeda Council will say, well, US Space Command, US, you don't have as much support around your planet as this rival alliance headed by China and Russia. So we're going to make China the point man. And so that's what the Chinese want. I mean, that's what their goal is. So, and the Chinese operate in the long term. So they understand it's going to take some time to do this, whether it's going to be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. But their ultimate goal, China's ultimate goal, is to become the dominant space power on Earth and eventually to be recognized by galactic civilizations as the lead nation for coordinating the space activities of all the major nations on Earth. So that's China's game plan here. And so this is what their Lunar Research Station is doing, and why China is launching major diplomatic initiatives such as forging a peace agreement between the Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they're now trying to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So China is putting a lot of resources into international diplomacy because it wants to build up its allies, because it understands that eventually there's great benefits in China becoming viewed as the most trustworthy nation on planet Earth by major allies. And the US is currently losing a lot of support, but nevertheless, there is a long way to go before China supplants the United States. So let's go to the next story. Okay, so this is the letter. This is the top story. And this is a letter from Larry McGuire, a Canadian member of Parliament, to Canada's Defence Minister, saying that recovered UAP or UFO material is being studied by a Five Eyes Technology Working Group. So this is this story, and let me open up this image for you, so hopefully you can read it as I discuss it. So here we go. All right. So this is the story. And here you have the letter to the Minister of Defense, Minister Anand. And Larry McGuire said that he had attended or been told about meetings that various officials from the US Senate have sat through, where they've been briefed on the recovery and exploitation of material from unidentified aerial phenomena. So this is the whistleblowers that have been going to Congress, to the Senate Committee on Intelligence, reporting on these recovered spacecraft, and that they have been studied in various corporations that are trying to reverse engineer these. So his Larry McGuire's big concern was that he was concerned that AUKUS, that is an alliance between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, which is a defense alliance primarily aimed at countering the influence of China in the Pacific. And he's very concerned that those three nations, that they have been cooperating at the highest level as far as studying and conducting analysis of these recovered spacecraft. And so this is, for me as an Australian, it shows how Australia has undergone a remarkable transition. So now it's actually working at the top tier with countries like the United Kingdom and the United States when it comes to the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial spacecraft. Well, why is that? I think there are a number of reasons. Probably the most important is that Australia, just as it was during the Second World War, considered to be a kind of major bastion against Japanese expansion in this kind of Asia-Pacific region. Similarly, Australia is considered to be the major bastion against Chinese expansion in the Asia-Pacific region. So I think that's why Australia was kind of green-lighted to be part of this joint intelligence and defence sharing between Australia and the United Kingdom when it comes to nuclear technology. And so there was a deal that was struck about a year ago where Australia and the US and the UK agreed that Australia would now be building nuclear-powered submarines, Virginia-class submarines, and that the French were very unhappy about that. The Chinese also were very unhappy about that. But I don't think that was really what was going on. That's the cover story. I think what was behind that was that it was agreed that Australia would now be read in at the highest level with all of the secrets concerning reverse engineering extraterrestrial spacecraft that the United Kingdom and the US have for many decades now been jointly cooperating on. And other Five Eyes nations like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand have been kind of sharing intelligence. But the big boys, when it came to dominating, what was happening in those reverse engineering projects, were always the United Kingdom and the US. Well, now Australia has been elevated to that top tier, and the Canadians were very concerned. Larry McGuire was very concerned that because Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US are now sharing all of the data on UAPs, and they're coordinating to make official announcements. That essentially he's saying that those three countries are going to be making official announcements soon to the publics, to their respective publics, saying that recovered spacecraft do exist, they are being studied, these are extraterrestrial, and that they are releasing the truth to the world. So that is what is going on now. And so this is what the Canadians are very concerned about, that if you have Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US announcing this, then you're not going to have Canada looking very good when this comes out. So he's telling the Canadian government, they really need to get their act together and start disclosing the truth. Now, one of the things that's very interesting here is that he refers to this organization within the Five Eyes nations called the Five Eyes Foreign Material Program, which is studying all of this. And this was very interesting, that this is an organization that is sharing data about UAPs, UFOs, sharing that data among the Five Eye nations. So Larry McGuire's letter is very, very significant, and so that's something that a lot of people have been discussing. And I did a follow-up tweet which gives you a little bit more information about this Five Eyes material program, which is quite interesting. It is telling us that this is a data sharing organization involving those five English-speaking nations that make up the Five Eyes, and they're sharing intelligence such as human intelligence, geospatial intelligence, signals intelligence concerning UAPs. So that's quite something. So that is the Five Eyes Foreign Material Program that is being studied, or that is studying UAP reports and gathering intel on that. So quite a development. So that was the Larry McGuire letter. Here's a news report that I tweeted about the Five Eyes nations having their first meeting to discuss UAPs and UFOs at the Pentagon, which was reported at a NASA meeting by the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office Director, Sean Kirkpatrick. So here's this particular story. So this was a story that confirmed that you did have this kind of like Five Eyes Foreign Material Program meeting, and that this was actually discussed at a NASA meeting concerning UFOs. So it's official that now you have the Five Eyes nations conducting research into UAP. So that means, if you think about it, in the United States, you have three different investigations of UAPs. One is being run by the Pentagon. One is being run by the Pentagon, which is the Arrow initiative. One is run by NASA, which is where they have 24 civilian scientists sitting on a board to discuss and analyze UAP reports. And the third is a interagency initiative being headed by the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, for the Biden administration. So the Biden administration is running a third UAP investigation. So now we've learned from this Larry McGuire and his revelation that there's a fourth UAP investigation that's underway, and that is being conducted by the Five Eyes nations. So the Five Eyes nations are pooling their resources, and that they are studying UAP reports. So really, with this particular story, we can say that there are 4 independent UAP investigations that involve the United States, and one of those involves the Five Eyes nations. So quite a development there. Okay, so on June 21st, that was, I believe, Wednesday night, I was on an edition of Redacted, where I discussed Larry McGuire's letter on UAPs. And so
has just emerged.
Let's play a little bit of that for you.
Larry McGuire. In this letter, McGuire reveals that the Canadians, along with the other Five Eyes alliance, the US, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK, have UFOs or UAPs from other worlds, off-world vehicles, and they are actively reverse engineering these craft, and then, of course, covering it up.
Okay, so that was the redacted story, and that really does go into detail into what the significance is of this Five Eyes initiative to study UAP. So very important breakthrough, because the Five Eyes nations naturally are going to be pulling together a lot more data than just one nation. So if the United States has 3 UAP investigations going, when you have the Five Eyes nations pooling their resources, you've got 5 English-speaking nations all pooling together everything that they know about UAP reports, and of course, whatever is cleared for the various UFO investigations to know about. Well, here in this particular development, I did an interview with Tom Carpentier, who is a long-time international relations scholar who is based in New Delhi, India. And so he's very knowledgeable about ancient Indian history and the history of Eurasia. He travels that world extensively. And so in our interview, we went into a lot of depth about the Vimanas, about the various types of craft, who built them in India, in Vedic India, what is known in the Indian interesting in that particular Com Carpentier, how he was saying that India is still kind of like behind the 8 ball when it comes to research on these particular topics. As far as he knows, India is not conducting any kind of equivalent reverse engineering programs of recovered extraterrestrial spacecraft that you see in the United States. So and Indian scientists are very skeptical. Now, of course, that might just be because the Indian program is better hidden, but yeah, I think his guess is that that they're still kind of catching up. But nevertheless, India does have a space program, and as we will soon see, that's very significant when it comes to the Artemis Accords. So yeah, India's space program, definitely something that is very important given the extensive history India has. And one of the things that I find particularly interesting about India, and the same goes for China, is that both are very, their history goes back into antiquity. And both India and China have ancient spacecraft that were mentioned in their historical texts. So I think what you will find is that many of these spacecraft, weren't just described in historical texts, that some of them are still there, that they still exist. And so, whether it's a matter of time before they activate, whether Indians are already finding and beginning the study and reverse engineering of these craft, we're not sure yet. Com Carpentier wasn't kind of very knowledgeable about that particular development, but he certainly knew a lot about the ancient texts and what they had to say about these advanced technologies. So the next story I want to cover is an astounding revelation by Dave Rossi, who's working with some breakthrough energy scientists. And he made a statement after being questioned about some of the things that have been going on in the UFO community in terms of public smearing of Elena Danaan and a few others that are working with Elena. And he said something that was very significant. So what I want to say about Dave Rossi is that he is someone that is working with some of the leading breakthrough technology scientists on the planet. And he was given that kind of level of access because he, about 2 years ago, he was having contacts with extraterrestrials, and he very quickly transformed from a plumber who had a very basic understanding of mathematics and physics to someone who had all of those kind of abilities activated to the highest degree. All of a sudden, he's understanding and writing complex mathematical formula to explain various problems or solutions to problems, and to explain how breakthrough technologies can work. So this came to the attention of some of the leading breakthrough technology scientists in the world, and they were amazed at what they were seeing, that this uneducated individual plumber who, after having extraterrestrial contacts, was suddenly having all of these brilliant theories and could understand complex formula that could be used to solve some of the intricacies of these breakthrough technologies. So what Dave did was he showed me some of the correspondence he had with these individuals, with these scientists, and I was able to confirm that, yes, he is having top-level conversations with some of the leading breakthrough technology scientists on the earth, or at least in the United States, and they are paying attention to what he's saying. So that confirms that he is familiar with some of the information that is circulating amongst that community. That community of breakthrough technologies. That's a kind of like select group of individuals that are read into various degrees into classified programs, but they come together and discuss issues in a way where they can kind of like not reveal too much about their classified program, but share enough with others so that they can collaborate and solve problems. So he's getting some important data from them about what's going on in UAPs. So this takes me to the tweet that I want to discuss with you, and that is Here's the tweet where I talk about an interview he did with Danny Henderson. So what I want to do is play this interview for you so you can hear him address this question of what role the Aerospace Corporation is playing, not only in the surveillance of Elena Danaan, but also in a public smear campaign to discredit her. So let's play that.
With you. Now let's go to the Air Force departments that you mentioned. You mentioned that they are in particular surveilling Elena Danaan, Dr. Michael Salla. I'm sure Chris O'Connor, who's also brought space technology here in the form of the Dean's device, which is a free energy device that actually helps to promote the piezoelectricity in our pineal gland, which is one of the worst things. The powers that think they are trying to prevent us, the human, from really recognizing what incredible organic technology we truly are, the power that we truly have embodied in this vessel that we inhabit right now. Can you tell me any of the Air Force departments that are particularly following and observing Elena Danaan?
Specifically, what I can tell you is that there is, in terms of a department, or dare I say a sub-department, one thing I can tell you is that this is the first time I'm actually saying this publicly. There would be elements out of what we know at the Aerospace Corporation that would be specifically surveilling certain individuals. And I don't want to, unfortunately, forgive me, at least publicly on the record, I don't want to get into specific detail as to the intricacies of how such operates. But what I can tell you is that there are certainly people that consider it a job to surveil Ms. Danaan, amongst others, for many hours a day, and weaponize and utilize stigma in an attempt to discredit her and others as well.
Right, I get.
So that's quite something right there, that the Aerospace Corporation is spending many hours and resources to not only survey, to conduct surveillance on Elena Danaan, but to also put a lot of attach stigma to against her. Now, why would they be doing that? I think the answer is pretty clear. It's because she is the real deal. She is having exactly the context that she describes. And the level of public attacks that she has been receiving are off the charts. And these attacks, some of them are part of this coordinated smear campaign being conducted by black hats, by the deep state, and the Aerospace Corporation is a leading player in that. So quite an astounding revelation by Dave Rossi. So I want to thank him for that. And of course, thanks to Danny Henderson for interviewing him and getting him to state that. Oops, I think I went ahead of myself there. Okay, so Dave Rossi, let's go. Okay, this is interesting. Now, Avi Lobe's science expedition to the Pacific Ocean near Papua New Guinea has found these tiny spherules. These are tiny sphere-shaped debris that are less than a quarter of a millimeter in diameter. So they're very tiny, but he's come up with an intricate system for being able to retrieve that. His hypothesis is that this is an interstellar object, and he believes it's an artificial object. In other words, he's searching for evidence of extraterrestrial life that built this craft that came into our solar system and crashed into Earth near Papua New Guinea and exploded. And what he's been able to recover are these spherules. And so far, he's been able to determine that these are an alloy that are very unusual. So that is what he has been able to discover so far in this expedition. And I think this is part of a kind of slow process of acclimating people to the idea of extraterrestrial life, saying that, well, Avi Lobe, his science expedition has been able to find evidence of some artificial craft exploding and then crashing into the Pacific Ocean there. And I think this is just part of the acclimation process that Avi Lobe is playing this role. He's he's got a great reputation as the former chair of Harvard University's astronomy department. And definitely it's a kind of like a very slow process. I think there's for those within academia, within public institutions that have been asleep to the whole issue of extraterrestrial life and the cover up, what Avi Loeb is doing is helping them open their eyes and to start looking at the data. But for those of us that are familiar with this information, that's it's not very profound, certainly. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of this. So one day to go. So this is going to air Saturday morning. So later today, I will be holding my next webinar on super soldiers and ascended masters. So I'm going to be looking at the literature concerning super soldiers. What are super soldiers? What types of super soldiers are there? How are they trained? What is done to them? And then I'm going to be looking at the literature concerning ascended masters. Who are ascended masters? What are they? How do they figure into this whole big picture concerning extraterrestrial life and technologies, secret space programs, super soldiers? How do these ascended masters fit into all of that? So in this webinar, I'm going to kind of lay out all of the data, all the literature that I've been able to research and put together a coherent framework for you understanding the different types of super soldiers that are out there, how the super soldiers are trained, and what kind of ascended masters exist, and what do they do? How do they factor into this whole big picture, which is very complex? So later today, great way to support my exopolitics research. Those that join the webinars, you do support my research. I want to thank you very much for doing that, because all my articles, all my podcasts, they are all for free. And so the webinars are one of the primary ways that you can support me. So thank you for those that do register for those webinars. Okay, and let's see what else. I think there was one other story I wanted to cover, and that's this one. Just learned that India has just signed the Artemis Accords with the United States. So that's very significant because, as I said, China and Russia wanted to set up a rival organization to the United States so that over time they would be perceived by extraterrestrials as having a more representative, a more equitable organization that could represent the Earth in space. And I think what this ratification, or what India joining the Artemis Accords does, is that it shows that the United States is still considered very highly by major nations. So this is where we need to kind of like pause a little bit and understand, exactly who does India recognize as a responsible kind of party here. The Biden administration, they've been doing a lot of things that, let's just say, are not very impressive on the international stage. Certainly not the sort of thing that would inspire great confidence. But when it comes to NASA and its cooperation with the US Space Force and US Space Command, that's when you have a lot of nations recognizing that the US is the undisputed leader and represents, or is at least the point nation for representing the Earth in all relationships with extraterrestrial civilizations. That of all the nations of Earth, the one nation that has the most trust when it comes to representing Earth's interests in face-to-face dialogues with extraterrestrial civilizations is the United States Space Force and Space Command. And that's separate to the Biden administration. So India signing the Artemis Accords, I think that's a big thumbs up, that they feel that NASA, Space Force, and Space Command are doing a good job in space. And by no means is an acknowledgement of the Biden administration, which people can have very different opinions on, and I don't want to get into. But definitely, this is a very major thing. India is are the world's most populous nation now. Earlier this year, it surpassed China in terms of overall population. And whereas China's population is a very old population because of their one-child policy, India's population is very young. So China's population over the next 10, 20 years is going to decrease, whereas India's will continue to increase. So it's going to become a much more important player in the international scene. So that's it as far as my stories, the week in review that starting from June 17. I want to thank you for being a part of this, listening, and don't forget to hit and like and subscribe to my YouTube channel or Rumble or BitChute, wherever you're listening to this. Really important to kind of like get the word out there, send this out to people that you think would benefit from hearing this kind of roundup, because you're not going to get this on the mainstream news. And I think the exopolitics field is something that is important enough now that we cover it closely in terms of week-to-week developments and how they relate to the big picture. So thank you again for tuning in, and aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.